Emma Chalupanet, and this is my FemTechNet video on the keyword deception. So I'm going to talk about deception as it relates to gender, specifically in relation to the Talia May Betcher article, Evil Deceivers and Make-Believers. In this article, Betcher uses the Guanarajo murder trial as a means of talking about this prevailing idea that trans people deceive the world around them through their gender presentation. In the murder trial, defense spoke of how Gwen had committed sexual deception or sexual fraud, and in fact violated her murderers by tricking them into having sex with her, which constituted a sexual violation that was deep and primal because of the importance of our sexuality and sexual choices to us. Thus, it was a crime of passion rather than a crime of hate, they argued. So one particular problem here with this idea of deception with trans people is that generally when trans people are represented, they're represented as being really a boy or really a girl, as masquerading as something they're not, essentially. And this isn't helped by the term passing, which implies that they're playing some sort of role. There's also this prevailing idea that genitals are what truly can determine sex. And this is made worse by the fact that society at large doesn't understand the distinction between sex and gender. Gender being how one identifies and sex being a biological, physical thing. But society at large uses those two terms interchangeably, which makes things like this particularly problematic. Some would probably argue that trans people should always disclose this information to people. They should come out as being trans, while others might argue that cisgendered people do not have to do this and it shouldn't be expected of trans people. Betcher brings up an interesting point in relation to this. She talks about how, in fact, cisgendered people do disclose their genital status on a regular basis. They do this through very gendered clothing, which is aligned with genital status. And in transgendered people, this is not the case. Their clothing is not aligned with genital status. And in a trans-specific community, this gender presentation is based on how you want to be interacted with. But in the society at large, this is seen as some sort of deception and misalignment. So this brings up the problem of disclosure, when to disclose and when it's not necessary to disclose. Disclosure is especially problematic because coming out already identifies someone as a deceiver of sorts. As I said earlier, trans people are represented as being really a boy or really a girl. Thus, from the get-go, you're identified as playing a role and being inauthentic. But there is still that expectation that people disclose this information. You can see this in James Spade's article, Be Professional, wherein the professors at the law school he teaches at ask him to find all of the new trans students and have them identify themselves as trans to the professors. But not disclosing also has a lot of issues. So you run the risk of forced genital exposure, just forced disclosure in general, which will also identify you as a deceiver. And may either disclosure or non-disclosure can result in violence. So both sides are very dangerous. The only way I see to really avoid this idea and get rid of this concept of deception as it relates to trans people is to change how we communicate genital status, or eliminate that communication in general, because that's the really problematic part of this. Terminology adds to it, but that's the central point. Thank you for watching. My name is Emma Chalupanet, and I invite you to post a video in response to this on FemTechNet.